Are we live? Cool. Hi. So we're on, right? I can hear my microphone. Okay,
I can
that's
hear
what
you.
that means.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh no, let me make sure I'm cute. Okay. Hi everybody. Thanks for coming. Um, Let me start by acknowledging where we're at. We're on Lenni Lenape land in a region named after the family that swindled the land from the first tribes that were here. So in recognition of where we are at, I did want to say that our organization believes in serving the community in actual resources, and so part of the proceeds of our shows do go to the Lenape people. And very soon in our season, which I'll tell you a little bit more about in a second, it is our intention to try to hire more First Nations artists. There's so many amazing performers and writers, and so it's my hope that in the next few public programs that you attend, you'll actually be seeing more art rather than me jabbering on about how important art by First Nations artists is. So having said all of that, you are here. You are at Asian Arts Initiative. You should turn off your phones. And we are a community-based arts organization. We believe in the power of art to create community, build community. And so I'm so delighted to be introducing our guest today and to talk a little bit about our season. I think the theme of this year's fall-winter season ties so nicely with the work that she does. And I'll introduce the theme first and then let our guest take it away. So this year, Asian Arts is talking about care, radical caregiving, what it means to come out of this really bananas year and a half, going back into another probably interminable season of just, wildness. We have to sort of recalibrate what it means to give care. So stay tuned, go to our website for a lot of cool public events taking place. We have an exhibition opening next week that will showcase mutual aids. Mutual aids are tools that we have used in communities of color for time immemorial, from the Underground Railroads up through today with Black Lives Matter. And these are support systems that we obviously create using resources to guide each other through in communities where the systems have failed us, frankly. So really excited to share that with you next week, so please do stay tuned. Okay, now this smoking hot 52-year-old lady sitting next to me. I have to start with that because I found out her age and I almost died. So let's start there. I don't feel weird about that. And her smoking hot dad in the background. People watching the live stream aren't going to be able to see this presentation, but we're watching a loop of still photos of the beautiful, beautiful Bruce Lee. We talk about how smart and talented and strong Bruce Lee was, but smoking hot, right? I mean, is that weird for you to hear?
No, I guess you can imagine I've heard it a lot.
Okay.
I'm used to it by now. 52,
I mean, you're
remember?
also smoking hot. Let's be clear. Let's start with that. So, smoking hot Shannon Lee. Gosh, where do I start? So yeah, CEO of the Bruce Lee Foundation, producer, writer, a martial artist yourself, and I'm finding out just in like the 3 minutes before we went live and talking with you, you're sort of a spiritual guru. She gave me some very much needed advice on how to have a really strong meditation practice. So that's something we can talk about offline, or right now.
Yeah.
I'm going to be like water today as much as possible.
Excellent.
She's working on a lot of things in development. She's working around the clock. You just dropped off your daughter at college, so we can talk about actual mothering as a form of caregiving.
Yeah.
But I'm also really excited to have you here to talk about this book you wrote that came out last fall, Be Water, My Friend, on the teachings of your father, Bruce Lee, who I don't need to explain who that is. But also, and then, we'll talk a little bit about Camp Bruce Lee, which is a great project that you were gracious enough to let us host at Asian Arts this year in Philadelphia for the first time.
Yes.
So yeah, without further ado, Shannon Lee.
Hi. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, hi everyone. It is lovely to be here. I mean, you make it sound like, oh, I was so gracious to let you host Campers Lee. I'm so thrilled you wanted to host Campers Lee. I'm so excited that you are hosting it, and I hear this week has been going well. Campers Lee is a project of the Bruce Lee Foundation. It's a day camp for kids. The program currently is a week long. It was really designed by me for kids. You know, it's flexible. It's a little bit like water. It can be as young as 5. It can be as old as actually we want it to be. Right now, I think, you know, we're in the sort of 12, 13, 14 range at the high end. But the idea was really to, first of all, give some martial arts practice to kids, just in a fun way. Let them feel the strength of their bodies, let them move their bodies, develop their inner warrior more than anything else. And then also to provide activities around my father's philosophies. We call it philosophy in action. So it's fun activities, but to get kids sort of into a place of fun introspection and developing, hopefully, some nice tools at a young age. Because for me, the reason I do all of this that I do is because I have been extremely nourished and cared for by my father's philosophies. They have helped me immeasurably in my life to overcome obstacles, to grow as a human being. And so my desire is to pass that on to as many people as possible, from little all the way up the spectrum. And so that's why the camp, that's why the book, that's why all the things.
You had a passage I think you were going to read from the book. Do you mind just sharing a little bit?
Oh, sure. Sure. So this is a short passage, just a page, from the chapter called The Obstacle. As we all encounter obstacles at different times in our life, and this is sort of toward the very end of the chapter. I just thought it was a nice thing to share in terms of mindset, and especially given where we are right now as a society. When the dream starts to fall apart, or the formula we are using stops working, this can be a time of crisis. Or this can be a time of coming back to oneself, back to your dream, back to your clarity. It can be a time to reassess and maybe dream anew. It can be a time to purposefully empty your cup, unclutter your thoughts and emotions, and make space for something you haven't considered before. And if the clarity, vision, and purpose of your dreams are still there for you, even in the face of big obstacles, then it is time to pick up the pieces of the dream and reassemble them. Same vision, different shape perhaps, or newly clarified vision, even more defined shape. Whatever the configuration, put the different fragments of the dream together and re-own these fragmented parts. Re-own the hidden potential in the dream. As we progress and time changes, it is often necessary to reform the formula. There is always something to learn if you look closely, and especially from within our obstacles. Our obstacles are among some of our greatest teachers. They will show us how to benefit most from our strengths and our weaknesses. They will open us up to new realms of understanding and help us develop new skills if we allow them to do so. Do what seems wise to be done, forget it, and walk on. Walk on and see a new view. Walk on and see the birds fly. Walk on and leave behind all things that would dam up the inlet or clog the outlet of experience. Sometimes we are sent on a whole life journey we never intended to go on. specifically because we rose to the occasion of what our lives threw at us.
I have two comments. One is, I mean, that's so beautiful, and I'm hearing that really loud and clear. As you said, because of the times we're in, right? When
Yeah.
it does feel like we're carrying a lot of unnecessary baggage, and I apologize for that metaphor because I know that can mean a lot of things. But there's this great parable you shared early in the title of the learned elder who says, yeah, I already know about that, right? Like he's being taught a lot of cool things, and he's like, no, I already know. Yeah, I knew about that, or I know this already. And then I guess the teacher then tries to pour water into a cup to overflowing, and then he says, stop, it's overflowing. And he's like, oh, well, but it already has the information, and
Yeah, I mean,
so the idea of emptying the cup before filling it again, right? And just being open to letting go of the information we think we already have.
yes.
This felt so profound in like the age of Twitter doom scrolling and
Yeah.
And the second comment I just wanted to make really quickly was I love the use of the word philosophy here, because that's exactly what this is, and Bruce Lee was certainly a philosopher, and you are too. But I love it because I'm looking at it a couple academics, and we all know philosophers are the fuddy-duddies, most annoying people to be around sometimes.
Yeah.
But this, I liked in your title, in your book, this relaxed approach to philosophy, right? That it doesn't have to be an end-all, be-all, and it's not pretending to have all of the answers. It's just,
Yeah, well, so to my father, and he has a quote which is in the book, he talks about this, and he says, philosophy can actually be the disease for which it pretends to be the cure. So it's like you can get really caught up in, well, this is the philosophy of my life. This is the way it's supposed to be. This is what da-da-da-da-da. But what are you actually doing? Are you living that philosophy? Are you actually attempting to embody whatever philosophy you're trying on? Or are you just espousing philosophy and then not actually doing any of it? And my father, I think one of the genius things about him and why he was so mesmerizing to watch and so engaging and so uniquely himself is because he attempted to live his philosophies or his practices, teachings, ideas, all those things. Yeah.
We were talking a little earlier about the anxiety created by asking what if, right? And it's usually a what if of negative consequences. What if they don't like me? What if the camp sucks? What if,
Yeah.
And you were sharing just, as a parent, our jobs are sometimes just to be like, but what if it's fun? Like, what if you actually, what if you meet cool people? What if they like you? And also you just don't know, the whys behind how people might be acting. But the what if to negative consequences seems to be so pervasive today and really guides not just our anxieties, but even our strategies for life, right? Like I do these things just in case these awful things happen.
Right.
Right.
Right, and there's no harm in being prepared in your life, right? I want to say that. At the same time, you don't want to live in fear all the time. It's very deteriorating to one's energy, to one's mental health, to one's emotional stability. And so, we were talking about this in the context of my daughter, who I just dropped to college, as Anne said, and I said she has a tendency to be anxious, and I said to her, do you know what's going to happen? Do you actually 100% know what's going to happen? No. Well then, why live into the fear? You could instead live into the possibility. The possibility that something great is going to happen. And at the same time, which this book talks a lot about, develop tools so that when something challenging happens, you've got some things to rely on. You know where to go for help. You know how to calm yourself, or you know how to whatever the situation calls for, right? It's great to have tools, but don't make the tools this armor that keeps you separated from the world and living in fear all the time. And my father talked a lot about being present. You know, to be like water is to be present to what is. What is happening right now? When we're caught up in our mental, what if this, what if this, what if this, we're thinking about something in the future. We're not thinking about right now. And we're giving the energy and probably what's totally fine in this moment away to this negative perspective and all this turmoil and anxiousness. When we look around, we can just say like, well, right now, everything's actually okay, right? I'm just sitting here, I'm talking to you, we're all here, it's great. Right. But then, you know, there are things we have to prepare for, but the better way to use your mental energy is like, okay, well, how am I gonna prepare for that? Rather, oh, but what if I prepare and then it's not good enough?
Right.
But what if you prepare and it is? What if it's actually more than enough? What if you over-prepared? You're like, wow, that was a lot. I mean, we've all had that experience. Wow, that was a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. But I think the thing that's interesting about my father, and I mentioned this in the book, is that, you know, he's a man who wrote thousands of pages about essays and his thoughts and ideas and creative projects and all this. And one of the things I find really interesting is that there's not a lot of negativity in those writings. It's mostly positivity, what I want, how I want to be, what I want to create. And I find that really beautiful because he focused his energy in the direction he wanted to go. And as we know, accomplished a lot.
I think, yeah, and I mean, God, I forget sometimes just the massive amounts of just production, right? Like as a production powerhouse, he just realized a lot of his dreams. But, you know, I'm just thinking about what you just said about in his writings, there's little negativity. And I want to be clear too, we're also not endorsing like blind optimism, right?
No.
But I think what's cool, I'm going to invoke my favorite show, but The Treatment for Warrior, for example, right? Such a good show. But that's a show that I feel kind of espouses what you were just describing, which is turning a negative bit of history, or what could easily have become like sort of a much deeper tragedy as far as story formats go. And I'm totally going to kill this fly by the end of this night, by the way. But using speculative fiction to turn it into this like martial arts fantasy, rather than just say, oh, look at all these Chinese people getting demoralized, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm being very simplistic on purpose, but just, you know, that's a way of rendering reality and sadness and tragedy and discrimination and inequity into this whole other format, which is fantasy, right? I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah.
Because the outcomes don't change. He didn't change history by writing this story. He didn't change discrimination or, you know, Exclusion Acts or the Page Act, but just, you know. But this like, this alternative world just kind of gives a generation or two later a lot of people this, you know, great totally
That's
getting
a different book.
That is a different book. What's the universe trying to tell us?
Well, I will say my dad has a great quote about optimism, which is that optimism is a faith that leads to success. So it's like having faith and applying that faith patiently. And another of my favorite quotes is, patience is not passive. Patience is concentrated strength. So it's like, think about how hard it is to be patient sometimes. And you're like, I want this, I want this, I want this. And it's like, you know, optimism is not just like, I have blinders on, everything's fine, it's fine, it's fine, I swear. You know, it's like, no, it's part of the faith that I have in myself, part of the faith that I have in my plans, my ideas. And yes, I mean, my father is a perfect example of someone who ran into obstacle after obstacle after obstacle, but kept going because he had optimism, because he had faith in himself, and because he knew his vision was clear, like in the passage I read, like the clarity of his vision. And whenever he hit a roadblock, he'd say, okay, I still want the same thing. Obviously, it's not working this way, so how do I reformulate this and to find another path toward the same goal? Yeah.
Another aspect of your writing, not just his, but especially yours, I think that's so interesting in light of how we treat demagogues, is that there's this weird lack of, this isn't the cult of personality. I mean, certainly there's a cult of Bruce Lee and everybody's obsessed, there are people who are very obsessed with him. But in the writing and the way you write about it, it's, you're really shying away from the opportunity to be like a rhetorical idol, right? Like you keep saying, but this is just me, and you might have a different way of doing this, and I can't speculate what might be going on, right?
Yeah.
And this is by no means, and that tone, you know, I know some of it is probably just self-preservation, but it's really kind of refreshing, right? Because there's so much out there right now that it's probably saying the same thing, but in a much more forceful way.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if you want to talk about like just, I mean, I just think of everybody on the news or in social media and like everything from Instagram influencers to, you know.
Yeah. Well,
Orange.
everybody's in a process in their lives of finding their answers, right? Like you're in the process of trying to figure out what your answers are to the questions that you have. And it's really great when you see someone who's succeeding in some way and they say, here's the answer. But just because it was the answer for them doesn't mean it's the answer for you. At the same time, something that they did may have some value for you. But as people, we have a tendency to kind of want to go like, oh, okay, this is how we do it. Okay, this is what I'm going to do, you know? And it takes the pressure off you, certainly, but at the same time, it also takes you out of the process a little bit. And so when I wrote this book, and this is really a lesson I learned from my father, which was, you know, he taught martial arts and he mixed philosophy into his martial arts and his teaching. It was very important to him. But he was always careful to say, and in fact, my father he only wrote one book in his lifetime. It was published in like 1963, and it was this little tiny book called Chinese Kung Fu, the Philosophical Art of Self-Defense. And after that, he wanted to write another book, and he had created Jeet Kune Do, and he had all these thoughts and ideas about martial arts. And he took all these pictures, which make up the Bruce Lee's Fighting Methods books now, which were published posthumously, but he could never bring himself to publish. And it's because he was so afraid that people would say, okay, here it is. This is it. Crystallized. Not a living thing, not a process, but a Bible, you know? And he always wanted his students to investigate their experiences for themselves. What works for me might not work for you, you know? Or, you know, you might be taller than me, or, you know, whatever. Left-handed, you know? All these different things, right? So, so I learned that from him, and it was a conscious choice in writing this book to really try, you know, there were many drafts, and there were times it was like, and so what you should do is, and I'm like, no. What has worked for me is this. What might work for you, you need to discover. But in case anything I say is helpful, then please take it. Please use it, you know. And that was really the approach, and I'm glad to hear that you felt that in the
Yeah.
pages.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
refreshing again after, it's like a glass of water.
Exactly.
After all of the rhetoric were served up in the very specific way that, you know, social media rhetoric does have a way of sort of flattening everything into just the tone, not the content, right?
Yeah.
So this is nice because it's like, hey, take it or leave it. I'm like, I will
Yeah,
leave
I
it.
try.
Just kidding. We'll take it.
I try to be as neutral as possible because we all have our own experience.
Well, talk about neutrality because you go into that. But just
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's like I try to approach it from a more just generalized humanistic standpoint. We're all humans, but our experiences are very different. You know, how we were raised, what our culture is, what our, you know, what's happened to us along the way in our lives, how we think about things, how our brains work, how we learn, what our learning styles are, all of these different things. So neutrality is a really great tool for learning, for personal growth, and for awareness. If you can try, and this is the empty cup, like if you can try to take all of the things you think you already know, your preconceived beliefs, ideas, notions, judgments, all of those things, if you can work to remove all of that and try to experience everything just as it happens, as it occurs, and to not immediately, oh, that person is, you know, this way, or oh, that's da-da-da. And it's to the story you said of the guy who goes to visit the master and he's asking the master, you know, oh, so how do you approach this? Oh, well, I approach it, oh, yeah, I do it that way too. Okay, so how do you approach this? Well, I approach, and the guy keeps cutting him off, and eventually he says, well, I mean, what are you talking to me for? You seem to already know everything you need to know. And the master starts pouring him a cup of tea, and he keeps pouring and pouring and pouring, and it overflows. And the guy says, hey, you're overflowing the cup. And he says, oh, yes, the usefulness of the cup is in its emptiness. So that's what neutrality is. It's like, if we can approach every situation neutral as much as possible, we're all humans, so we all have our, you know, ideas and thoughts and all of that. So no judgment, I have them too. But as much as possible, just to approach, you know, an experience without. And I go on through, you know, I tried to use really mundane examples in the book that are mine, just because my father, as you can see, he spoke so poetically, so beautifully, and it's really nice. But I wanted to sort of take it and put it into like everyday terms, you know, like, oh, I'm going to this party. Oh, I really don't want to go. Or, oh, that person's going to be there. They're so annoying. You know, like taking all that off. If you decide to go to the party, you just go. And you just wait. And you just see what happens. It's kind of what we were talking about, you know, even if you can't have a positive outlook, you can be neutral. And in the neutrality, you leave yourself open for it to be just whatever it ends up being.
I'll share anecdotally that without really, I haven't mastered the art of entering a room with neutrality.
It's not an easy thing.
But I certainly, and I think all of us have experienced entering a room with some, just a knowledge that you might have to code switch, right? Just this knowledge that you might just have to be like, okay, I'm turning off. What are you saying, right? Just, which is more sort of less neutrality and more like, I'm gonna keep an open mind until the situation ends, right? Like, I'm talking about run-ins with like weird in-laws or the, you know, that person who really wants to touch your hair, right?
Yeah.
So like those sorts of microaggressions. And I'm bringing this here because what I want to say is in those situations with age and experience and maybe a little bit of, I have nothing to gain or lose from these experiences, they don't anger me anymore. And instead I just think like, I can't wait to tell this story later. So it's already been metabolized as an anecdote rather than me taking it under the skin, right? So I'm not like, oh, well, that person is problematic and racist and et cetera, et cetera. Rather, it's like, yes, all of those things are true, but I'm going to leave with this with a really funny story and definitely going to subtweet, right?
Well, and also it's a way of looking at people. I think when we work on ourselves, like I've had the experience of when I've worked on myself and really looked at myself, really looked at my issues, my faults, my judgments, and all of that, and learned how to have better self-care, better self-love, better all of that sort of stuff. I realized then that I start to enter into rooms with a little bit more compassion for people, because a lot of these people are just people who have not looked at themselves and who have been raised and in environments that have set them up to be how they are, you know, and they're just operating their program, you know, just like I in my whole life was operating my program that made me insecure or made me, you know, not want to share how I was feeling or made me act a certain way, right? And so it's also helpful to go like, okay, wow, you know, we're all human, so we interact with people and go, wow, okay. But then you can later step back and just go like, well, and that's because this person just has things they can't see. It's just not in their awareness. They don't, and they are only operating through their own experience, and their experience is limited in some way. And so this is just a thing to sort of like ask you to understand what your experience is and how can you broaden that just a little bit. Yeah.
I liked something you said offline about just, I was saying that something about guided meditation felt very self-serving and sort of, you know, like just too much self-centeredness. And you said, well, who else are you going to serve? I mean, and I loved that answer because, you know, and I appreciate this wisdom of like understanding yourself will just bring a better you into the room, right? Like it's not, no, ignore everybody and do this at the expense of the world. It's, you can't really show up, and we've all heard this, but you really can't show up until you are self-aware, which is different than just selfishness, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting that, you know, self is used in ways that are positive and in ways that are negative. There's ego self, and then there's like true self in a way, right? And we use the word selfish, but also there are a lot of times when it's okay to be, quote, selfish, you know? We use the word self-centered in a negative way, but also, I mean, don't you want to be self-centered? You know what I mean? So it's really just about like, and I just say this in the sense of like, the more centered in myself that I feel, the more easy it is for me to be. And in my ease of being, it makes it easier for everyone else to sort of be also, because I'm not just like putting up shields and blocking people and, you know, even just with my energy and my thoughts, you know? And so my father talked all the time about self-knowledge. And he said, all knowledge is self-knowledge. And I love, there's a thing in the book, there's a chapter on relationship and seeing oneself in the mirror. And it's sort of like everything that I look at and how I feel about it and what I see is actually a window into myself. Because if I'm looking at this and going, oh, well, that's, you know, this way, that way, it's a window into how my brain works, what my preferences are, what my challenges are, right? And so relationship and how we all are with one another is an important thing to constantly be in connection with And it's such a learning tool for learning about ourselves. And I do think, as I said before, that, you know, when you work on yourself and you start to go like, oh, I have that problem too. Oh, I'm judgy. Oh, shoot, you know, like, darn. Then you can start to sort of ease up on everyone else a little bit too. Oh, we're all judgy. Okay.
Yeah, some people deserve to be judged, right? we need to just keep coming back to it. So you said something also really cool about, you know, and I think this is where I bring what you're talking about of self-discovery and sort of self-awareness to martial arts and physical kinetic energy and activity, right? And I've just seen 4 days of kids go buck wild. And they really, I mean, right? I mean, you can attest to this. Richard is our instructor. I hope you all get a chance to meet him in person after this. But that connection with the body is also really interesting because, you know, it's hard for me to go into this without it turning into this weird, like, I'm already feeling self-conscious, like if I don't want to suggest anything about like bodily health or, you know, methodologies and how they get convoluted, but just at the very core of like getting in touch with your body and feeling, you know, a whole sense of it. There's a way that it's espoused in the Bruce Lee philosophy and in your book and in your personal practices that feels nice. But it is, just like what I was saying earlier about philosophy being sort of taken over by, you know, rhetoric monsters, like the body and the wellness industry has also been a little bit co-opted, right? Like it's like, I need to eat all these expensive things Gwyneth Paltrow just told me to, or like, you know, all the controversies facing the different schools of yoga, but like this very basic place of like getting a whole sense of the body, you know, is really interesting. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, I mean, and I'm going to put you on blast a little bit, but you're in the heart of it in Los Angeles, so you know, I think you know exactly what I'm talking about.
What?
But, but how do you avoid that? Or how do you, I mean, and maybe this is me asking you for a recommendation for future sort of teachers of like mind-body awareness.
Yeah.
Right? Like, what makes yours successful, to me at least? And then, you know, how do you navigate that space?
I think this is a huge challenge that everybody has. It's certainly been a challenge for me in my life. I mean, you know, I'm the daughter of Bruce Lee, so like everybody's like, well, why aren't you in better shape?
Oh my God.
You know what I mean? Do you have a 12-pack ab? No.
Just say yes. What are they going to do? Make you show it?
It's under this padding. And so it's something that I have struggled with a lot in my own life. Like, you know, food is a comfort for me. It makes me feel, you know, comforted, really, like emotionally comforted. And it's something I've dealt with my whole life. And in the book, I talk about like this memory that I had of when I was a child at my father's funeral, which was just this chaotic, there were thousands of people, this is in Hong Kong, lining the streets. We were in traditional Chinese mourning garb, being hustled in and out. You know, it's July in Hong Kong, so it's hot. And I have this specific memory of afterward when they were sort of like hustling us away. I don't know who it was. Someone was like, come on, I'm going to take you and go get some candy. And I was like, candy?
Yeah.
Okay, yes, please. Like something that will make me feel good, happy, you know. And it took me, but I was in my 40s when I was like, oh. That's why food helps me to feel like, okay, I don't feel good. I'm going to eat something, you know. And it took me a long time to figure out how to care for my body. I'm still trying to figure out how to care for my body. But it is important. Some might argue my father cared a little much for his body, you know. But he's an amazing specimen of what can be accomplished if you want to, but it doesn't mean it has to be your path. But it is worthwhile. So movement of the body in whatever way you choose to do it, whether you just choose to go for a walk, stretch, yoga, triathlons, like whatever, is a way of being in connection with yourself. Understanding, where energy is stuck, understanding how you feel. I mean, one of the things I love about the practice of martial arts is that it brings up a lot of emotions. And if you think about it, your emotions come from your body. They don't come from your mind. Your thoughts about your emotions come from your mind, but your emotions come from your body. And so when my dad says, don't think, feel, it's like, don't get caught up. We talked a lot about getting caught up here, like, well, this and on this, and this isn't right, or this isn't good, or this is how it should be. It's like, when you're in the ring, the first time I ever got in the ring to spar with someone, this person came at me and I was like, ah! Like, stop punching me already.
Natural response.
Natural response.
Yeah, I would curl up like a potato bug. Okay.
But that's it. So it's like, we're all every day in life-threatening situation in the sense that we are every moment trying to figure out what we want to do in this moment, right? And sometimes that moment is dire and stressful, but even if it's not, it's still like, well, what am I going to do right now? Okay, should I do the chores? Should I lay here and binge watch Netflix for 6 hours? Like, what should I do? So I say life-threatening, but really what I mean is like every moment is a moment of your life, right? And so this notion of seeing how you show up for your life is about feeling what's going on in your body, right?
Yeah.
So it's like in the ring, when I have pressure put on me, I have an opponent in front of me. This is why I think the practice of martial arts is so great, is I have like the stress of life in the figure of a person who is attacking me. And I get to see how, whether I can maintain my clarity, my mental clarity, whether I can pull my tools out that I've been practicing in that moment. And it's all about my emotional state. Am I in the fight or flight mode? Do I want to duck and run and get the hell out of there? Or do I suddenly turn into this angry, fist flailing, not present at all person? And it's like, well, I'm feeling into my body, and the point of practicing, the point of having practices, whether they be meditation or affirmation or whatever, to try to be better, is to try in the moment of stress to be able to pull that tool out. It's easy to practice something when there's nothing going on. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
meditate for a little while.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But like, can you keep that calm, centered space in the middle of chaos?
Yeah.
Right? That's what it's really for. And so the body, to me, my body is an invaluable tool. It tells me, that's where your intuition comes from. Gut feeling, right? Ooh,
Yeah.
antennas up.
Yeah.
Something's weird here, like that's from your body. So anything you can do to be in connection with your body and moving it in whatever way you want to move it helps your body to stay strong, which helps your connection to your body to stay strong.
Yeah.
So.
I love that. I love that because I think for me and for a lot of folks, it's probably a pretty novel idea to listen to your gut first instead of like what your brain tells you is right. Like we say things like it's irrational, or I need to rationalize this, or how does this make sense on paper? But lately I'm noticing more and more the questions I'm being asked are like, where are you feeling this in your body right now, right? We're like going into sort of discussions how are we feeling? Like, let's just make sure we're bringing our full selves. Like, those are the kinds of questions that are being asked.
Yeah, and also it's like your imagination can be a really useful tool in terms of connecting you to your body. Because a lot of times when I have to make a choice about something, I'll say, well, how does it feel if I feel into this choice, how does that feel to me? Does that feel good? Do I feel good if I lean this way? If I have to make a choice about whether to take this meeting or go on this trip or participate in this thing I've been asked to participate in, I sit in the feeling of it. I say, well, if I said yes to this, how does that feel to me? Huh, okay.
Yeah.
And if I say no to this, how does that feel to me? You know, no feels really good a lot of times, you know? You're like, oh yeah, no, I don't want to do that. You know? And if you're neutral, then it doesn't matter. It's your choice. You do it. Or don't do it. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
We were also talking about how to listen, right? Because the other part of it is sometimes my gut is actually saying like, yes, bitch, do it. And then I'm like, but I have a life, I have a child, you know, those are all factors. I would never put my family at risk for any voice in my gut, by the way, I'm just saying. But yeah, just like learning to listen to it. And again, this voice keeps coming back at me like, this is such an extravagant way of life. Like you're talking about paying attention to, you know, feelings, really? But it's true that it can be really revolutionary.
Well, and this is what I want to say. So there's feelings, like, you know, we all have feelings that pop up. Your feelings aren't always the best indicator of what's true, but they are an indicator of how you feel about it, and that's a point of investigation. I think all of this is a point of investigation. So when I talk about feeling, a lot of times what I really mean is sensing. Not like, you know, am I angry, but, which has information for you as well, but, you know, stepping into something and sensing, oh, wow, I'm angry. Like having an objectivity about it. I think sensing has a little bit of a, like, I'm stepping back and I'm assessing what's going on with me. And I've had moments where I'm like, wow, look at me, I'm really angry right now. It's been crazy. You know? And the thing is that it is very hard to trust your gut, to go on faith, to go on what you think is the best path with no available proof, right? You have to have sort of a sense of yourself, what you're willing to endure if it doesn't go the way you plan. But you can start small. You don't have to be like, well, it seems like the right thing to do to quit my job and move to Alaska. You know? Like, you could start with like, well, how do I, you know, I'm going to go on faith that I think, you know, this is, you know, that I should, you know, go to this luncheon. And then you go to the luncheon and you show up there as neutral as possible and you say like, okay, well, I felt like it was the right thing to do to come here, so what am I going to find here? And just that attitude of like curiosity over trepidation is such a nice shift. Like, okay, well, what is here for me? You know, or this is so interesting, or I'm curious about that person, or I'm curious about how I'm going to feel about this later. A lot of times, terrible experiences are the best information you can get, because you're like, oh, don't want to do that again.
True. Yes, that's absolutely true.
Yeah, but you can start small until you build up that muscle of trust.
So
in
speaking
yourself.
of starting small, so I want to come back to Camp Bruce Lee, but I love that this project and this program are designed for kids, and we are teaching slightly older kids than the curriculum you originally designed was for slightly younger kids. But I think our group is such an interesting age range because it's really just on the precipice of, you know, chaotic adolescence, the preteens. But I mean, wow, talk about bodies getting to a place of understanding their whole self, right?
Yeah.
And I wonder if you want to talk about why kids and not 40-year-olds.
I think it's good for kids and 40-year-olds, but
But why not a Camp Bruce Lee, middle-aged edition?
that's this book.
Does this come with free lunch and foam nunchucks and a T-shirt?
Buy your book and then take some martial arts lessons and
Okay,
you'll be
okay.
covered. No. Because I know for me, I look back on my life, I had to learn from my father as an adult because my father died when I was 4. So I didn't have the benefit of him during those growing up years to say, the usefulness of the cup is in its emptiness to me when I was 6 or whatever. I had to wait to grow up to be able to read that and actually make any kind of sense out of it whatsoever. But I knew that once I started to gain some of those tools, I share in the book a lot that after my brother died, when I was right before my 24th birthday, I was plummeted into this deep, dark place of grief and depression that went on for about 7 years. And in that time period is when I started to really delve into my father's writings. And it was my father's writings that started to help me shift my thinking and understand that I'm responsible for making myself feel good. Nobody else is going to do that for me. We all want someone else to do it for us, but nobody else is going to do that for me. I'm suffering on the inside, and only I know what my suffering is, and only I can look for the cure for my own suffering. And so it was him who really helped to guide me out of that darkness. But in the finding my way out of that, I realized that I had been mildly depressed most of my life because my father died when I was 4. And even though my brother's death was much harder on me because I was older, so I really understood that loss in a really, vital way, I realized it's the same loss that I had before. I couldn't put it in any kind of context.
Right.
And so I'd been living my whole life up to that point in a certain amount of depression and just pain on the inside without understanding. I literally thought everybody just felt how I feel. And I think that is something that we as humans do. Well, I feel this way, everybody feels this way. But we don't, because we're the product of our own experiences, right? So, it wasn't until I sort of worked my way out of that I was like, oh, you don't have to feel this way. Oh, there are tools to help yourself. And so I was like, oh my God, if I had known that when I was mildly depressed from the age of 4 onward, I would have been, a different person, really, because I would have potentially been healthier and in less emotional suffering in my life. Maybe not all, because we all grow up and things happen to us in our lives as kids, and being a teenager is hard and all that kind of stuff. But hard in a different way, right? Without that extra thing. And so for me, in the creation of the camp, I thought, I would just love it if there were a way to give kids this, let me think about who I am and what I want and how I feel, and then also let's put some tools in their hands. And maybe they'll use them and maybe they won't, but that's okay. Just to give them the idea that there are tools, that they exist. And by the way, like, as you said about the book, like, I was like, by the way, like, here's some stuff that worked for my dad. Here's some stuff that worked for me. None of this might work for you at all. You might pick up this book and read it and be like, ugh, you know? But the thing is, if you picked up this book to read it, it's because you wanted to know something.
Right.
So if it's not in this book, it's somewhere else. You just have to find it.
I love that. Wow, and it's just really hitting me. And thank you for sharing about your grief. That's I lose sight of that because you're smoking hot 52 years old. So, but I think it's
self-work gets you, people.
see, it works. But you're right. I mean, the kids do have tools. We give them hammers and brooms, and they're totally cleaning up the building. It's really
Good.
But
Little effort never hurt anyone.
yeah, I mean, we can't pay them because they're children, so it's fine. But I think it's great. You're talking also about grief tools, right? Just like practical tools for finding, it's another version of self-determination, but really sometimes that's all we have because we do lose people.
Yeah.
We lost a lot of people this year.
Yeah.
A lot. So I think a lot about just the kids that we're working with, and maybe this comes back to what your daughter was saying about what if, but ultimately that's really a fear of everybody dying, right? I hate to be macabre, but like this is a nice way of thinking of, well, that is the worst thing that can happen.
Well, in my opinion, actually, it's not. We don't really fear death. I mean, we do. We think we fear death, but what we fear is suffering. And part of the problem is that we are all suffering all the time. But when we hit grief, we're really suffering, and then it's like okay to acknowledge that suffering. But really, we're suffering within ourselves all the time because we have these thoughts that make us feel bad about ourselves or about other people. How many times have I thought I wasn't good enough, or that people didn't like me, or I was unlovable, or whatever? And that is suffering. Because when you are running that mental dialogue, it doesn't feel good, and it makes you feel small and like you have to control things, and like life has to be a certain way in order for it to be good. But really the only thing that has to switch is the mental programming. Like, one of the things I talk about is that my father conditioned his mind just as avidly as he conditioned his body. And we all know what his body looked like, right? Sure, there's a slide coming up soon.
And responsible family.
But that's the thing. It's like we don't think about. There it is.
There it is. Sorry, I just have to say, if his mind looks like that, can you imagine this?
But this is what I'm saying, right? Like, our mind is what gives us our perspective on life, what we think we can and can't do, what our limitations are mental more than anything. It's not to say we don't all have some physical limitations, but also it's how we feel about the physical limitations that we have and what we think we can do with the physical limitations that we have, whether we feel like we can be happy if we don't have, quite as much money as we'd like to have, or if we don't have, if we have relationships that are troubling. Like, everyone has all of these different obstacles and all these different things in their lives, but can you work on yourself such that the tools you gain are these mental tools to help you figure out how to switch your programming? Look, my father was, by the way, not some meditative guru sitting on a mountain. He got really angry sometimes and upset. But my mom would say, whenever anything bad would happen, like when he injured his back really badly and he was bedridden and told, oh, you're not going to be able to do martial arts anymore. This was before he made all the movies, right? I mean, he was really upset, and rightfully so. And she would say, whenever he was upset, he would get upset. And then he would sit with it for a minute. And then he would say, okay, I'm upset. So now what am I going to do? Right? And it's like, it's very hard to change your mind, your mental patterning. I don't want to make light of that at all. It's the work of a lifetime. It really is. But it can be done. It can be done. And so, and as we know, like using his back injury as a metaphor, he was told by the doctors, that's it. Not going to be, no more martial arts, that's it. And he was like, well, and this is an extreme example because not everybody can work their way back from an injury, but you can shape your life in a way that is then acceptable over time. But it takes effort.
Yeah.
It takes effort. And so during that time, and one of the reasons why we have so many writings is because he was bedridden, so he wrote. And he read books, self-help books, and books on back pain, books on, like that kind of stuff.
I'm dying to tell people with severe back injuries to start writing. Just try it. I know how tortured writers are, right? Aren't we always like, oh my God, I can't write. I can't do it. That's too hard. I can't do it.
Yeah.
But if Bruce Lee could do it, pretty much paralyzed. I mean.
Yeah. Well, he wasn't paralyzed.
Well, let's just say.
Not over exaggerate. but he was in a lot of pain when he would move. So yeah.
Yeah. That sounds like writing.
Yeah. Yes. Listen, I wrote a book. I know. I would sit down and I'd be like, I'm going to write now. And I'd type like a paragraph, then be like, I think I'm going to get a snack.
Yeah. One of my favorite jokes is, how do you get the house clean? Start writing a novel.
Right, exactly. That would be right.
Yeah.
That would be right. But that is a war that you're fighting with yourself.
Yeah.
Which is what we're talking about, really, right? Like your deepest, most complex, smartest, most cunning opponent is you.
On that note,
Yes.
I want to open it up to questions from the audience if folks want to say their questions, comments.
Anything. It doesn't have to be about philosophy. Yeah, it was a huge challenge. When my dad was alive, it was martial arts 24/7 in our house. Like, if you could move your arms and legs, you were doing martial arts, So, like, we have pictures of, there might even be one in this carousel of, like, my brother is, like, a toddler. He can barely walk, and he's, like, kicking. So it was natural. It was natural for us. But then my dad died, and then he became Bruce Lee. I mean, he was already on the way, but like Enter the Dragon came out after he died. So then this movie traveled all around the world, and Bruce Lee fans all around the world started popping up. And martial arts was a huge craze, and he was like the greatest martial artist of all time. And then it was like, oh yeah, no, I'm not doing that. I mean, partly in my grief, but also partly just like, that's too much pressure for me. Like, I can't, what? You know? But we were active kids. We played sports, we did all sorts of things, but we did not train in martial arts as children. And a lot of martial artists start when they're kids, which is great, but also you don't have to start when you're kids. I started in my early 20s, you know, and my brother started when he was about 18, 19. And both of us came to it a little bit later in life, but I think also as a way to know our father. Because for our father created his own martial art, so like there's that. But also he said, everything I've learned about life, I've learned through martial arts. And so it was sort of like, oh, well, if I want to know why this was so important to him, then I need to do it. But still, I didn't do it by like marching down to the local martial arts place, because that still felt like too much stress for me. So I trained in private with one of his students in the backyard. My dad was big on training in the backyard. He taught people in our backyard all the time. It's actually a funny story about when my brother was little. He had a little friend, neighbor friend that lived down the street, and he always played over at the neighbor friend's house. And one day my mom was picking him up and said, you know, your son can come over to our house. And she said, I don't know how to say this, but my son is afraid to go to your house. Always these grown men like beating each other up in the backyard. She was like, oh, okay. Wow. So, but I started that way, and that's what I say by starting small. You start with what you can do, and then you work your way up, you know. And then ultimately, I did start to train with, you know, other people and go to their schools, and I just had to sort of drop the self-consciousness, because self-consciousness is about making yourself too important to other people, but not important enough to yourself. Right? If you're only caring about what anyone else thinks, and it's stopping you from pursuing the thing you think you might like to try, you know? And so there's always been a little bit of that pressure for me my whole life. I've gotten better at being Bruce Lee's daughter. Now that I'm 52. But it's not always been easy, but it's always been what I've said to myself about it. And that's not to say there aren't haters out there. There's plenty of haters. And that's something to wade through also. People who just want, oh, well, you're not very good, you know? And it's like, okay, yes, it's true. I've only been doing this for like a few years. Give me a break, you know? And also owning that my path, and this is where I think my father's philosophy has really helped me, which is, he really believed in self-actualization. And that's to say, your path is your path. So I could have chosen to try to be the greatest female martial artist of all time, but that's not what I wanted to do with my life. It's still not what I want to do with my life, and at 52 it might be hard at this point. But, because there are a lot of great female martial artists out there, but it's not what I wanted. And I just had to come to be okay with. Every time that I would start to like freak out a little bit about being Bruce Lee's daughter, I would say like, okay, but your dad wants you to be you. That's what dad wants. Aww. Okay. Okay, I'll try, I'm trying to be me. But so kudos to you for, I mean, here's the thing, like, you know, being courageous doesn't mean that you don't have fear. You have to have fear to be courageous. Otherwise, it's not courageous. So good for you for walking in the door. It means you're courageous.
Hi, thanks for this. I have a question about Jeet Kune Do.
Yep.
I'm just really curious about it, and when I Google it, you get these very simple explanations, you know, like he was dissatisfied with XYZ and you want to do something different. I'm just wondering, I don't know if you write about it in the book, or could maybe shed some light. What exactly was he dissatisfied with, and what exactly did he want to do, and like why give it a name? You know, why not just say do whatever you want? Like why did he have to come up with this thing that he calls, you know, gives its own name? And I don't know if he wants to call it a school or an approach, but you know, I'm just kind of curious if you could just shed some light on it.
Totally. So Jeet Kune Do, he gave it a name because he needed to call it something. But really, Jeet Kune Do was his approach. And part of the philosophy of Jeet Kune Do is my approach might not be your approach, but that's part of what I'm going to teach you my approach, but I'm also going to allow you to have your own approach within that, right? And so he didn't like to call it a style because he felt that saying, you know, that this is a style concretized it too much, and then also separated people. Because what he could see happening in the martial arts is that everybody had their teacher, and then they would fight with one another over who was better, you know? That's why the UFC was created in the beginning, right? so which art is better? And so his approach, and I don't know if you know about, at the very, very, very end of 1964, my father had opened a school in Oakland, and he was teaching, and he was saying, you know, oh, you should be able to be more free. We should be able to teach whoever we want, all this kind of stuff. And the traditional Chinese Kung Fu community in San Francisco said, no, you can't do that. And so there was a challenge match that was fought. And if my father won, then he could keep teaching. And if he lost, then he had to stop teaching. That was the stakes. Came to his school, they had a match, he won, and then afterwards my mom came out, and he was sitting on the curb after they left, and my mom came out and he was sort of sitting there with his head in his hands, and he looked really upset. And she said, what's the matter? You won, you know? And he said, that didn't go how I thought it was going to go. My traditional Wing Chun style did not prepare me for a no-holds-barred contest where anything goes. And the guy started running, and he was chasing him, and you know, all this kind of stuff. Back then, martial artists did not cross-train. They just did technique training. And so he had no wind, he had none of that stuff. And he was like, this doesn't work. Like, if I want to actually call myself a martial artist, then I have to let go of this is how you do it, right? So like what we've been talking about, no, this is how you do it. This is the answer, right? And I have to find my own answer. And that's why he created Jeet Kune Do. Now, about giving it a name, he gave it a name because and the name had meaning to him, but he also wrote extensively to say, if we're going to start arguing about what Jeet Kune Do is and what Jeet Kune Do isn't, it's better if the name Jeet Kune Do just disappears. Because that's not what Jeet Kune Do is, right? And so people over the years, many, many people have wanted me or my mother or somebody to step in and say, this is Jeet Kune Do, this is what it is. And I need to, you know, I need to say which are the good instructors and which are the bad instructors. And I'm like, I'm not doing that. First of all, I'm not interested in doing that. And second of all, that's just to like not understand Jeet Kune Do at all, right? And so after my father fought that match in Oakland, he went to his friend George Lee, who was a machinist, metal worker, and had him create this little miniature headstone. And on it, it said, in memory of a once fluid man, crammed and distorted by the classical mess. And it was his little symbol of saying like, look, I've been crammed and distorted by like, no, it's this. And I'm gonna die to that way of thinking, and I'm gonna be reborn into, I'm a human being. And he would say, there is obviously on one level, but on the highest level, there's no Chinese way of fighting or Japanese way of fighting or American way of fighting. It's like, we have two arms and we have two legs, and we use them in the way we think is best. And that's how all styles were created. The creator of any style was like, this is how I thought was a good way to do it. And so for him, that's what he did. And he started incorporating weightlifting, cross training, going to the ground, you know, well before everybody was going to the ground, he was going to the ground. And he looked at different arts and incorporated different things that he thought were great. But a lot of times Jiu-Jitsu is mistakenly characterized as, oh, it's a combination of 24 arts, it's got the kick from this, it's got the punch from this. It wasn't really like that. It was more like he took certain concepts of movement, like he really loved boxing, Western boxing. It's the sweet science, right? It has great footwork, and it has very simple tools. It's like 5 punches, that's it, right? And he was like, that's great, that's all you need. You need great footwork, and you need just a few punches, right? And then he really loved fencing, because fencing has you attack from a distance. So Jeet-Kune-Do has you being able to hit with your upper body weapons from a lower body weapon distance, which makes you much more, and it intercepts your opponent's movement, which is why Jeet-Kune-Do is the way of the intercepting fist. So I liken it to this, like, if you're a really awesome chef, then you don't need a recipe. You have spent so much time with the ingredients that you know, if I add this, it's going to do this, and this interacts with this, and so you can freestyle, right? Which is what Jeet-Kune-Do is, like and what he was trying to say, which is like, I'm going to train and really look at movement, and really look at, like, after he started training with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, he was like, oh, 7-foot guy. I'm gonna have to change up my game plan here a little bit. You know?
Yeah.
So, and so it was always evolving, which is why he couldn't publish the book. You know, he was like, but there's more, there's always going to be more. And so for me, like, I've taken that way of thinking and tried to present it in, like, apply this way of thinking just to the creation of your life, whatever your quote-unquote Jeet-Kune-Do is, or you're attempting. And for him, he was an absolute nerd for martial arts. He loved it. And he wanted to find, like, how to be the absolute most amazing, real martial artist, and that's what Jeet-Kune-Do was for him. And there are techniques like that you can study and that he learned and that he taught, I mean, but there also has to be this flexibility of, like, well, especially now, here we are almost 50 years later, right? And everything is always changing and shifting, and that's part of the philosophy of Jeet-Kune-Do. That's part of being like water. I hope that, I mean, we could go on and on and on about it if you want. But
Oh, lots of questions, lots of questions. Oh,
Yeah, I had a question about the warrior. Like, so how much was that translated from his original writings? How much was that lost, and how accurate is it? How do you think your father would have felt about the adaptation of that? And then, I guess he's like the OG of, like, an Asian Asian guy trying to get into film. So how do you think he would react to, like, I guess there's kind of like an Asian movement of movies and blockbuster movies, like, coming forward. How do you think he would feel about that? How do you feel about that? Then a follow-up question would be, is there going to be, like, a more adaptations to any of the writings that he has had, or any new content? For example, like, The Game of Death is like an incomplete movie which has some of the best classic action scenes, and would there be a remake or new adaptation of that or something?
Everything is on the table and in the works. I think my father would be thrilled with how Warrior turned out. I think that and I am thrilled with how Warrior turned out. It is very true energetically to his original treatment. The treatment was written in the 60s, so it was more written like episodic television was back then, with the sort of like adventure of the week. But the time, the place, a number of the characters, like Big Bill, the police officer, was also in his treatment, and the Tong Wars and the Chinese Exclusion Act and all of that was a part of it. But it was still 8 pages. That's the 8 pages, just not a show make. And so, you know, Jonathan Tropper, who's our writer, and Justin Lin, who's my producing partner, and I, you know, really Jonathan, most of all, had to create this whole world. But the thing that I really appreciated about Justin, and the reason why it took such a long time to get a project going based on one of my father's original treatments, was because, I mean, look, people see Bruce Lee and it has, it's a bright, shiny object. It has cachet. And so Bruce Lee, yes, let's do a Bruce Lee thing. That would be awesome. People love Bruce Lee. Let's do that. And I'm like, yes, great. Let's do it. But the problem is that nobody wanted to do it from the perspective of what Bruce Lee would really want. They just wanted to slap the name Bruce Lee on it. And I was like, you know, we're not doing that. Like, it has to actually fit within the legacy and the energy of the project, and it has to be done the right way. And Justin said those exact words. He was like, this is amazing. We should make this show, and we should only make it if we can make it the way we want to make it. And he had the same vision as I did. And, you know, the Asian representation piece of it was really important, making sure we got to hire who we wanted to hire and tell the story we wanted to tell, which we got to do. It only took 50 years to get it made. But actually, a lot of times I say, it's actually a good thing, because if that show had gotten made in the 60s,
Right.
He would have been the only Asian guy in it, probably, and it would not have been the show, that because the TV wasn't ready for that.
Well, most importantly, I couldn't have a bit part in it if it was made in the 60s.
Most important.
I can't have a walk-on role as a background prostitute unless it was being shot right now. So
It's true. It's true.
let's just be real.
But even that show, which has had 2 seasons and which is now going to have a 3rd.
Huge.
Yes, huge. Has had its challenges because, you know, even when we got started and got it on the air, you know, still people were kind of like, oh, whatever, it's a martial arts show, it's, you know. And then when HBO got bought by Time Warner and AT&T, and there was that whole merger, and they were like, whatever, we don't care about this show. And we had to fight. I mean, it was canceled. Like, there was not going to be a 3rd season. And we had to fight like hell to get them to, and it was only once Vanity Fair wrote an article about why the show was important and why they should keep it, that they were like, oh, they weren't even going to put it on HBO Max. It was just done. And we were like, I mean, you own this content, why aren't you at least going to let people see it, you know? And it wasn't until the Vanity Fair article that they decided to put it on HBO Max. And once they put it on HBO Max, everybody was like, this show is awesome.
Yeah.
They were like, hey, let's do another season. That makes it sound easy. It was not that easy. But to their credit, they listened, and we're about to start writing the 3rd season now. We're going to shoot it next year. And so it's going to take a minute for y'all to actually see it, but it's coming, which is great. And then, you know, you have to fly to South Africa if you want to be an extra.
Yeah. Totally there, not a problem. Yeah.
By the way,
We're fundraising as we speak.
by the way, every Asian person in Cape Town, South Africa is in our show, because there are not that many Asian people on
Cape Town represent.
Exactly. As to other treatments and Game of Death and all of that, yes, there are plans. There are other treatments. There are plans to do all sorts of things with them. I'm also working on a novel series as well based on some of the treatments. So we are in process. It takes a really long time to make that stuff. And Game of Death has always been one that I have wanted to do the way my father envisioned that project, which is not what the movie that was made is representing. But whether it'll be a straight remake or not will depend on whether the company that owns those movies, because this is not me, will allow that or not. But it doesn't matter either way. We're going to do something.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I just need to get that done.
By any means.
Yeah.
All right, let's do the last two questions. Yeah.
Hi, Shannon. Thank you so much. This has been such an honor to be sharing space with you. I probably have an hour worth of questions, but I'm going to limit myself.
I'll try to be more concise in my answers.
I have so many things I want to ask, but so you were talking about self-actualization and that your father wanted you to be yourself. Mm-hmm. And in the middle of all this legacy work that is so significant and so important, how have you found your voice? Mm-hmm. And how do you see yourself as part of this legacy, as either distinct from, or how are you adding to it to make sure that you are actually walking your path too?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. It's not been an easy thing, especially given that for the past 21 years, I've been dedicating myself to my father's legacy, preserving it, promoting it, all that kind of stuff. And so it was really easy to sort of hide behind that a lot of the time. I would say that in the beginning, I felt really insecure as a business person. I have a degree in music. So I do not have a degree in business. And so I was really insecure about all of that, which actually made it easier to hide out a little bit, because I was like, well, I don't know what I'm doing, So I just need how to figure out how to do this, and that will be me figuring me out. Well, to some certain extent, everything that you do is you figuring you out, but like, how much are you really paying attention to you in all of that? And I would say, it has ebbed and flowed in my life as I've gained more confidence in myself, in listening to my intuition, in knowing that, I'll give you a huge tip in being successful in business is caring about what you do. There's so many people in business who don't care about what they do at all.
Yeah.
And when that clicked, I was like, oh, I'm actually really good at my job because I actually care about doing a good job. And so, but it has been a challenge to identify myself, ideate myself separate from my father. It's also not really, I am not separate from my father in that he's my father. So I'm never going to be able to say that I'm not Bruce Lee's daughter. And then I had always this weird sort of chip on my shoulder about like, well, people are only interested in me because I'm Bruce Lee's daughter. They're not interested in me for me. And then I was like, are you interested in you for you? Because it's hard for other people to be interested in you for you if you don't even know what that is. And so I would say that over the last 6-7 years, I've really started to attempt more apply more focused work on who am I, what do I really enjoy, what really speaks to my heart. I love to write. And writing this book, and I love to like think about life and philosophy. I love learning and personal growth. I'm one of those people who will take all kinds of seminars and read all kinds of books and all that kind of stuff, which is very much stuff that my father would do. I have trained in martial arts, but I wouldn't call myself a martial artist in the sense that he was a martial artist. Like, I'm not opening my own school anytime soon. And in fact, over the last few years, I don't even train all that much, right? So, but I do other things, which is fine. It's all me finding my path. Writing this book was a huge part, because even though this is a book about my father's philosophy, my father's philosophy is very personal to me. I love it, and I get so much from it. And so me getting to sit down and try to express what is of value in it for me in order to share with you is a huge process for me. And in being able to express that, and hopefully in a way that is well received, it has helped me to find me a little bit. And so now, we were just talking about this upstairs, I'm actually, in about a month or two, going to be launching my own website. Separate from Bruce Lee. And it's not separate from Bruce Lee, because I'm going to be talking about some of this stuff, but I'm also going to be talking about other stuff. It's a place for me to be able to be myself. But like right here, right now, with all of you, I'm being myself. Like, this is how I am. Like, whether I'm at home, or whether I'm with my friends, or whether I'm with you, you know? So that is how I don't even think about it anymore as being separate from him, or separate, or from my own identity. I just think about how can I be myself, whatever that is, in whatever situation I'm in. Like, how can I express myself honestly, as he would say, truly. So.
I love that.
Hi, Shannon. Thank you so much for taking this time out of your busy schedule for this intimate moment. I was motivated actually to come tonight because of your work in Warrior. As a creative, I know it takes a village, so kudos to you and congratulations on the 3rd season. The last question was actually maybe more of I have a follow-up to that question, and it's more about race and your upbringing. So being mixed race, how did you navigate that growing up? Did you feel that the Asian did you feel that the Asian community didn't accept you? Did you feel like you didn't fit into the white community? I would love to learn more about how you felt about that, and then what would your advice be for the Asian American community now?
Yeah. Thank you for that question. I, as a person of mixed race, I have always felt a little bit like I don't 100% belong anywhere. But again, how I feel about that is what runs my reaction to that, right? So I cherish my Asian heritage very much. I'm honored to be Asian. I'm also honored to be mixed, because in a way I feel like I show up in some different spaces and in different ways, and I get to have a slightly different view because of that. The thing that I have worked really hard on, and I will say the Bruce Lee part of it is yet another piece on top of that, because I'm not 100% Chinese, I'm not 100% Caucasian, and then I'm Bruce Lee's daughter. Like, how do I enter a space? You know what I mean? Like, what? And my mom always said when we were kids, don't tell people you're Bruce Lee's daughter, just let them like you for you, and then later they can, and which was good advice to a child. But then as I grew up, I was like, wait, is this something I'm supposed to keep this a secret? And so then I've tried entering a space as like, regardless, right? I've tried entering a space as like, I'm Bruce Lee's daughter, I'm owning that, and then going like, ooh, that was a bad idea. You know what I mean? When I'm like in like some cosmetology office, and I'm like, well, whatever, they're asking me what I do, I'm just gonna say, And then the next thing I know, they're calling everyone in and trying to take a picture with me. And
Oh my
I'm
God.
like, just had like, a facial. And I'm like, I don't have any, no, thank you. Like, I'm not like an object for you
Oh my
to,
God.
what, treat this way. But also Asian, like, oh, I'm going to go into this Asian setting and I'm going to own being Asian. And then I'm like, well, but I'm not really. And people are always, oh, you don't really speak Chinese. I mean, I do a little bit, and like, same with entering into Caucasian, spaces. I don't feel comfortable there either. But again, all of that is because I don't feel comfortable in my own skin. So for me, my practice has been feeling strong and safe and confident in myself, such that wherever I show up, I'm embodying my version of home, my version of being, so that I can be, so that wherever I am being myself and feeling good in myself. And that, again, that's a hard thing to do. It's the work of a lifetime for anyone, by the way. And until this world gets to be a better place where, like, we'll allow people to just be who they are, and not attempt to categorize and separate and make people better or worse, then it's a hard thing to do, and there's safety that you have to be cognizant of. There's all sorts of things. Mm-hmm. And so I guess what I would say is, however you feel about yourself in whatever situation you're in, first of all, is okay. It's how you feel. And you get to decide in every moment what you're going to try to embody or be or do. And if you make a mistake, instead of beating yourself up about it, you're going to take that data point and you're going to use it for next time. Mm-hmm. And there are no two situations that are the same. And I fall back on silence a lot, which is hard to believe given how much I've been talking. But I do. In situations where I'm unsure, I fall back on silence a lot. And I just observe.
Yeah.
And then I just sort of wait to see, like, again, that sensing thing, feeling into it a little bit. Mm-hmm. Like, okay, I know I'm safe here. Mm-hmm. Is it safe out here? I don't know. Let's see. Feel into it a little bit.
I'm getting a lot of sense of safety in that you have been very generous with your words. And I think we're all so stoked to be hearing from you. Oh. And I mean, honestly, right? Like, we could do this for another 2 hours.
Obviously, I could keep going.
I recommend we do that. At the reception we've prepared for you, I need to pee so bad. Let's close this up. But I want to thank everybody for coming. Oh my gosh. Thank you. Let us continue. Just past that exit sign is our box office, which we've prepared for a light reception. We go outdoors, so you can take your masks off. Rest assured, we've both been vaccinated, and she's actually been tested. So, and we've been transfusing blood for the last 6 months.
So far, it's been fine.
Yeah. Totally fine. But yeah, please meet us out in the reception outside at the Pearl Street Alley. Whew, thank you. Whew. And thank you, viewers.